The old house stood on a hill, its dark windows watching like empty eyes. It had been abandoned for years, a relic of a time long past. The locals whispered about it, sharing stories of its haunted history. The house seemed to breathe with a life of its own, its creaking floors and groaning walls telling tales of those who had once lived there. They dared anyone to enter. The challenge was simple: spend one night inside the house. Many had tried, but few had succeeded. The house had a way of getting under your skin, of making you see things that weren't there. It was as if the very air inside was charged with a malevolent energy, waiting to pounce on the unsuspecting. Inside, a group of teenagers laughed, their voices high with excitement and fear. They had heard the stories, but they were young and fearless, eager to prove themselves. They gathered in the dimly lit room, the flickering candlelight casting eerie shadows on the walls. Their laughter echoed through the empty halls, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence that usually filled the house. They were about to play the whispering game. It was a tradition, a rite of passage for those brave enough to enter the house. The game was simple, but it had a way of revealing things best left hidden. The teenagers sat in a circle, their faces lit by the soft glow of the candles. They were nervous, but determined to see the game through to the end. A silly dare, they thought. A game for kids. They were wrong. The game was simple. One person would start by whispering a secret into the ear of the person next to them. The secret would then be passed around the circle, each person adding their own twist to the tale. By the time it reached the last person, the secret was often unrecognizable. One person would whisper a secret. It could be anything. A harmless confession or a deep, dark fear. The game was supposed to be fun, a way to pass the time and scare each other. But in the old house, the game took on a life of its own. The secrets seemed to linger in the air, growing heavier with each retelling. Not just any secret, but their deepest, darkest fear. The kind of fear that kept them awake at night, that made their hearts race and their palms sweat. The kind of fear that they had never spoken aloud, not even to their closest friends. The house seemed to feed on these fears, amplifying them until they were almost unbearable. The whisper would travel from ear to ear, changing with each retelling. What started as a simple confession would morph into something far more sinister. The house seemed to twist the words, turning them into something dark and malevolent. The teenagers could feel the change, a growing sense of dread that settled over them like a heavy blanket. What started as a whisper could become a scream. The game had a way of bringing out the worst in people, of revealing their deepest, darkest fears. The house seemed to revel in their terror, feeding off their fear like a hungry beast. The teenagers could feel the walls closing in, the darkness pressing down on them. They had come to the house for a dare, but they were about to get far more than they had bargained for. The first round was easy. It started as a simple game, a way to pass the time on a stormy night. The teenagers gathered in the dimly lit room, their faces illuminated by the flickering candlelight. They were eager, excited, and a bit nervous, but it was all in good fun. Nervous giggles accompanied the whispers. Each teenager took turns leaning in, sharing their secrets with the person next to them. The room was filled with a mix of excitement and trepidation, the kind that comes with sharing something personal, even if it was just a game. Secrets of crushes and bad grades passed around the circle. They whispered about their latest crushes, the tests they failed, and the little lies they told their parents. It was innocent, harmless, and everyone felt a sense of camaraderie as they shared their stories. Each retelling added a twist, a touch of humor. The secrets became more exaggerated, the stories more outlandish. Laughter filled the room as each teenager tried to outdo the last with their tales. It was a game of one-upmanship, and everyone was having a good time. But as the rounds continued, the mood shifted. The laughter began to fade, replaced by a sense of unease. The stories took on a darker tone, the humor giving way to something more sinister. The teenagers could feel the change, but no one wanted to be the first to stop. The whispers grew darker, laced with real fear. The secrets being shared were no longer about crushes or bad grades. They were about fears, regrets, and the things that kept them up at night. The room grew quieter, the whispers more urgent, as if speaking them aloud would make them real. The teenagers leaned closer, their eyes wide. They were drawn in by the intensity of the stories, the raw emotion behind the words. Each whisper seemed to hang in the air, heavy with meaning. The game had taken on a life of its own, and they were all caught up in it. The room felt colder, the air thick with anticipation. The candlelight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The atmosphere was charged, electric, as if something was about to happen. The teenagers could feel it, a sense of impending doom that made their hearts race. The game was no longer child's play. It had become something else, something darker. The whispers were no longer just words. They were a force, a presence that filled the room. The teenagers could feel it, a sense of dread that made them want to stop, but they couldn't. They were too far in, too caught up in the game to turn back now. It was something else, something dangerous. The game had taken on a life of its own, and the teenagers were no longer in control. The whispers had become a living thing, feeding off their fear and growing stronger with each passing moment. They were trapped, caught in a web of their own making, and there was no way out. The whispers became distorted, the voices no longer their own. Each retelling of the secret amplified the fear, twisting it into something monstrous. The room seemed to pulse with an unseen energy. The air crackled. A cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the single light bulb. Screams erupted from the darkness. Panic set in. The game had taken on a life of its own. In the darkness, the whispers continued. They were no longer human. They were guttural, filled with malice. The teenagers scrambled to their feet, desperate to escape the unseen terror that surrounded them. Something moved in the shadows. A shape, tall and menacing. It emitted a low growl that sent shivers down their spines. The game had unleashed something evil, something that fed on their fear. Sarah, the youngest of the group, cowered in the corner. Her secret, the one she whispered in the first round, was the key to this nightmare. She had confessed her fear of being alone, of the darkness that hid unseen terrors. Now, her fear was real. It surrounded her, suffocating her. The whispers intensified, taunting her, reminding her of the power she had unleashed. The entity moved faster now, its presence a suffocating weight on their chests. It picked them off one by one, dragging them into the shadows. Their screams were cut short, replaced by the guttural growls of the creature. The game was no longer a game. It was a hunt, and they were the prey. Each whisper, each retelling had fueled its power, turning their deepest fears into a living nightmare. Sarah was alone now, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum. The silence around her was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the old house settling. She could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on her, suffocating her with its oppressive presence. Trapped in the darkness with the creature, the air was thick with the scent of decay, and every shadow seemed to move with a life of its own. She could hear the faint, almost imperceptible sound of its claws scraping against the wooden floor, a chilling reminder of the danger lurking just out of sight. It circled her, its hot breath on her neck. The creature's presence was palpable, a malevolent force that seemed to draw strength from her fear. She could feel its eyes on her, watching her every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She could feel its evil, its hunger. It wanted her fear, it wanted her soul. The creature thrived on the terror it instilled in its victims, feeding off their despair and hopelessness. Sarah could sense its anticipation, its eagerness to consume her very essence. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. She tried to block out the horror, to find some semblance of peace in the midst of the nightmare. But the darkness was relentless, and the creature's presence was inescapable. She wished she had never played the game. The memory of that fateful night haunted her, a constant reminder of her foolishness. She had been so eager for a thrill, so desperate for excitement, that she had ignored the warnings and plunged headfirst into the unknown. She wished she had never whispered her secret. The game had demanded a sacrifice, a piece of her soul in exchange for the promise of power. She had been naive, believing that she could control the darkness, that she could bend it to her will. But the darkness had its own agenda, and it had claimed her as its own. But it was too late. The game had begun, and there was no turning back. The rules were clear, and the consequences were unavoidable. She was trapped in a web of her own making, ensnared by the very forces she had sought to command, and there was no escaping its grip. The creature's hold on her was unbreakable, a vice-like grip that tightened with every passing moment. She could feel her strength waning, her will to fight slipping away. The darkness was consuming her piece by piece, until there was nothing left but a hollow shell of the person she once was. Sarah remembered her grandmother's words. "Whispers hold power," she used to say. But so do words of truth. With a surge of desperate courage, Sarah spoke. She spoke of her remorse, her regret for playing the game. She spoke of the good in her heart, the love she felt for her family and friends. She poured every ounce of her being into her words, hoping against hope that they would be enough. The creature hesitated, its growls turning into whimpers. The shadows receded, the air felt lighter. Sarah opened her eyes. The creature was gone. The whispers faded into silence. But the terror remained. Sarah stumbled out of the house, the first rays of dawn painting the sky with hues of orange and purple. She was alive, but forever changed. The game had left its mark, a scar on her soul that would never fully heal. The house on the hill still stands, a testament to the terror that unfolded within its walls. Some say the game is just a story, a campfire tale to scare children, but others know the truth. They know that the whispers never truly die. They linger in the darkness, waiting for someone foolish enough to play the game. The whispering game is always waiting, and sometimes it's just a whisper away.